Bill Long. I live in Bethesda. When I agreed to do this, I had no idea when we would do it. But this is the perfect date. This is when it happened. The last Saturday in June, 1945. And so today's the day. And I will try to do it justice. Now, Montgomery County is a good bit different in 45. No Beltway, no 70S, no TV, no computers, no internet. We went to the movies a lot. Bethesda had 2 movie theaters. Bethesda Theater, which is really a nice modern one, and the Heiser, which wasn't. It's hard to compare then to now. And I'm not really going to try, but you need to understand that Montgomery County was still mainly rural, physically. The population was maybe 90,000. There are more people in secondary schools now in the county than there were in the whole county then. And the county had been growing rapidly in the 40s during the war. The war brought a lot of people in the Washington area, mostly female. That was a different problem, yes, that they dealt with in different ways. We had the Navy Hospital, which was a huge structure and brought a lot of people in. We had NIH, which was another operation that brought in a lot of people. We had a nice little town that was pretty near self-sufficient. We had women's stores, half a dozen or so, and men's clothing stores, 3 or 4 good ones. Hi, come on and sit down. We had a fire department. As a matter of fact, we had 2 fire departments, but that's another story which I won't go into today, or we'd take a half an hour to explain to you how a small town ended up with 2 fire departments. It was carelessness, maybe. We had a department store called Palais Royal that later became a Woody's Budget Store at Landsberg. We had the Farm Women's Market, which is about all we have left in 1945 and still there. Actually, there's still some stores. And we had a railroad that came through town 3 or 4 times a day, a freight line that went from the main B&O line all the way down to Georgetown. As a matter of fact, when they built the Lincoln Memorial, they ran a little spur out to the building site. Most of the materials used in the Lincoln Memorial came through Bethesda and down to Georgetown. Hi. We're just barely getting started, so you haven't missed anything good. So in 1945, I was 14 years old, and the only president I had known up to that time was named Roosevelt, and he just died. So that was the early shock that we all had, is getting used to somebody named Harry Truman. Nobody knew President Truman. The war had ended in Europe. We had VE Day, we called it, on May the 8th, when the war in Europe was officially over. And now thousands and thousands of poor people were trying to go back to their homes. We call them displaced persons. People were being killed, slaughtered in Europe. Some of them were the Germans who were then. It was nasty business. Now plans were afoot to attack the Japanese homeland, to invade Japan. The experts said the war would last, maybe 2 more years. And they were selling war bonds on the basis that it would last 2 more years. Nobody knew it would last 2 more months. But that's the way history is. So we're in the summer of 45. the last Saturday in June. And a couple of airplanes fly past while I'm out front washing our Pontiac. My mother has set me to work. Work is something I avoided every chance I could. I had a paper route, but that was about the hardest work I did. But I was washing the car, and these two big planes flew over Bethesda. And I looked up and said, Hellcat to myself, because in those days, every boy and most girls could look at an airplane flying overhead and tell you its name. You recognize those planes. And hundreds of planes have flown over Bethesda, and many of them have flown through Bethesda very low, as young pilots came back to say hello to their parents and girlfriends. Early in the war, a pair of Stinson trainers, bright yellow biplanes, touched down on the baseball field at the high school and then flew by the junior high at second floor level. It was a long remembered afternoon. So there they were, two big Navy fighters. They're called F6F-5s, if you want to look them up on your computer. They're built by Grumman up in Bethesda, Long Island. And they were probably, and you know, lots of experts, they were probably the most successful fighter planes of World War II. They are credited with more than 5,000 kills in the Pacific. And they were a big, tough airplane, weighed about 6 tons. The engine was a double twin radial, 18-cylinder, 2,000 horsepower engine. Same engine used in a number of other fighters and bombers. Supercharged. Big airplane would do 500 miles an hour going downhill. And do 300 easily flat and level. The pilots were young, as you would expect. One was a JG named Charlie Arnott, and the other was an ensign named Bob Jewell, J-U-H-L. And this was their second flight of the day. In the morning, they were stationed out of Norfolk on a new carrier called the Boxer. They'd just done their, come on in, just done their shakedown cruise. And they were flying their new airplanes to break them in. So when they flew over Bethesda, come on in, we have some chairs up front here. We don't take up a collection, so it's okay. So
force us to sing.
Oh, yes, indeed. I interrupted myself.
Yeah.
We're-
You were
we're-
talking,
we're-
you
oh,
told us about the two
airplanes.
pilots.
In the morning, they had taken their new planes up and flown to Atlantic City, where one of them had a girlfriend that sold saltwater taffy on the log boardwalk. So they decided to say hello to her. And they flew out to sea, came in right down on the deck, lower than the boardwalk, and then pulled up over the taffy, the saltwater taffy house, spiraled together out of sight before anybody could get their numbers and get them. So this was their second flight, this flight. And they were coming to say hello to Charlie's girlfriend, who was a Navy nurse and was stationed at the hospital in Bethesda, you know, that big white tower. So they flew north. Now remember, this is a different world we're in. This is basically bucolic kind of countryside.
Right.
No 70s, no beltway, none of that kind of stuff. Very little travel. They flew north up to around Rockville and then turned and came back toward Bethesda, aiming at the Navy hospital, which was easy to do because it stood out some planes. And they came across the Navy hospital's front yard at flagpole height at about 250 miles an hour.
Oh my gosh.
And then they pulled up together, one right behind the other, over the middle of Bethesda. at about 70-degree angle, I was told, and spiraling, barrel rolling, they called it. One right behind the other. Now, I was out in my front yard washing our Pontiac, and I heard them and saw them. There they were, almost overhead. And suddenly there was a terrible noise. Crunching, crashing, tearing sound. The second plane had torn the tail off the first plane, chopped it clean off. And the appendage, the tail of the first fighter, spun away toward Battery Lane, landed in somebody's front yard. The big fighter flipped upside down, and the pilot, his name was Charlie Arnett, cranked open the canopy. He told me it took 2.5 turns, and he remembered it well. Released his seatbelt and fell out. He pulled the ripcord as he left, and his parachute tangled and ran up behind him. He told me, I found, if I had time, I'd tell you how I found it. Trying to find somebody before computers were invented was a pain, but I found it. He said he thought he was about 700 feet up. He said, if I looked down and you were looking up, I could see your eyes. He said he could see flowers. And he thought he was going to die. And he said, well, you better to die smashed like a tomato than to blow up with his airplane. Because his airplane, tailless, and still doing a couple of 100 miles an hour, engine roaring, had turned over and was coming back toward the middle of Bethesda. Saturday afternoon. The grocery stores were full of women using up their ration stamps for June. Movie theaters were doing matinees, mainly kids, double features, and they were full. The drugstores were busy. They'd gotten cigarettes that day. Remember, these days everybody smoked, by the way. It's hard for me to tell you how cheap things were. Cokes were a nickel, Hershey bars were a nickel. Gasoline was 5 gallons for $1, but you couldn't get 5 gallons because you're only allowed to have 3 gallons a week under a gasoline ration. Cigarettes were 20 cents a pack, penny a piece. Where was I? Oh, I know where I was. Charlie Arnett's falling out of his airplane, and his parachute is streaming out behind him, and he's falling straight down at Giffords. You know where Giffords was in Bethesda? Giffords is a great big ice cream store, big square white building with pink paint on it, in the middle of Bethesda, between the Humphreys, the funeral home, and the Bethesda Theater, and the Buick dealer. And Charlie was aiming at that, falling out of his airplane. His airplane, meanwhile, had righted itself and was headed back toward the middle of town. Charlie's parachute opened just about when he fell into a tree in Walter Perry's front yard. He told me the lady came to the door and looked out and fainted, but Charlie was a terrible liar. Made all kinds of stories up, and I don't believe a word of it. But his parachute tangled in the tree, and he released it and stepped down about 5 feet to the ground. His airplane, meanwhile, roared over the middle of Bethesda, getting lower and lower. It came over the firehouse and the Acme grocery store and a line of stores including Sproul's Barber Shop, where it shook the bottles on the counter and scared the hell out of the customers. Clipped the trees on Edgemore Lane and crashed into the only empty lot in town. I swear to God, I know Bethesda well. I couldn't have found another empty lot. Bethesda's People's Drugstore was on the corner, and behind People's was a parking lot. And behind the parking lot, there was an empty lot. And then there was a brick apartment building. The plane plowed into the empty lot and exploded. It was carrying probably 200 gallons of high-octane gasoline. The engine plowed through the soft dirt and buried itself 10 or 12 feet into the ground. Part of the propeller spun off toward the next block. And it blew up and tore itself apart. And I saw, as I was 2 blocks away down East-West Highway, I saw this pillar of smoke rise from behind the drugstore. So I ran upstairs, found my little brownie Kodak, and trotted up the street. And by the time I got there, behind People's, and saw a pretty good sized crowd, maybe 100 people, standing around what was left of the airplane, which was scattered debris for the most part, shredded aluminum. You could see where the wheels joined the wings, and where the wings, you know, on these Navy planes, the wings folded. So there was a heavy mechanism in the middle of the root of the wing where the wing folded. Part of that was visible. The back half of the fuselage, from the cockpit to where the tail had been chopped off, was sitting in front of the hole. And the hole was as big as this group of chairs, with the engine buried in it. And the firemen were arriving when I got there. And they hooked up their hose and started spraying it, and the engine billowed out streams of steam, so they stopped doing that. Then the police arrived. Now the plane had come down halfway between the firehouse and the police station, about 100 yards on either way. And so there were plenty of people there in uniform almost immediately. I did not see the pilot. Charlie told me that he walked down, 2 or 3 people came over and asked if he was okay, and he walked down, it's about 2 blocks, to see his airplane, see what had happened. And he claimed that he picked up a couple of fragments of souvenirs, and that somebody, a Navy officer, arrived from the hospital with a nurse in a, he told me what, a Packard ambulance, gray, if you remember that. And they talked him into coming with them and going back out to the hospital. By the time I got up there, which might have been, I don't know, 5 minutes after the plane exploded, he had already come and gone. I guess, I don't know. I was, 14 years old. I was oblivious. 14-year-old boys are oblivious, I assure you. I taught them for years. They don't know where the hell they are or what's going on, and that's normal. And I didn't either. I was 14. But I used up all my film taking pictures. and so when I was finished doing that, I just stood there and watched. I stopped spraying fire water on the engine because every time it did it, it looked like it was going to explode again. And within an hour, there were Marines around there with rifles on their shoulders. And within 2 hours, the Navy had sent construction material and were starting to dig the engine out of the hole. That night, they worked all night picking up the pieces of the airplane and digging the engine out and filling up the hole. And on Sunday morning, you know something had happened because there was obviously had been disturbance on that old empty lot. But there was no airplane and very few pieces left. Kids, of course, had taken home lots of pieces of aluminum as souvenirs. Sunday's papers, Washington had 4 daily papers. 3 of them had Sunday editions, the Times, Herald, the Post, and the Star. The story was short, 4 paragraphs maybe. Did have the pilots' names. Did use the word stunting in the story. The Post had a photograph of the tail on Battery Lane. That was on the front page of the Post. But the Navy had forbidden news photographers to take pictures of the plane. So there were no pictures of the crash site itself. On Monday, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Navy clamped down wartime censorship on the event. Now Bethesda, which was a town of 25,000 maybe, had 3 weekly newspapers. Can you imagine? The oldest newspaper was called the Tribune. It was a Democratic mouthpiece for E. Brooklyn. There was a Republican newspaper called the Journal, and a new newspaper called the Record, which was a women operation. The whole business, editors to printers, was all women, and it was better than the other 2 newspapers put together. All 3 of them had stories viewing with alarm about airplanes stunting over Bethesda and about how lucky they were. Jewel, I had trouble getting in touch with, but through getting in touch with Charlie Arnett, I got in touch with Jewel and I corresponded with him. And he wrote me, and it's quoted in my book, he wrote me as sincere a short paragraph as I've ever read. He said, I flew over that site and looked down at it and knew it was the hand of God. He said, it's the only thing that explains it. There's no other way to explain it. That plane didn't hurt anybody. It didn't cause any physical damage. It plowed into the dirt where there was no other place for it to plow. Or, do I get paid by the head? Hot damn. She was counting the nuts. The local papers, all 3 of them, viewed with alarm and asked for something to be done and for stunting to stop. And the Navy assured them that the pilots would be punished and that very strict rules would be, but nothing. The Navy did absolutely nothing as far as I can tell. 40 years later, when I was writing a book about Bethesda, I filed a Freedom of Information action to get the accident report from the Navy. The Navy said no. It's not. It's all censored and redacted. This is 40 years after the accident. Both pilots are dead now, so maybe I can get the accident report. I haven't tried lately. But that's the story. That's what happened way back in the last Saturday in June 1945.
So the other plane was undamaged?
Can't hear you.
The other plane was undamaged?
No, the Jules plane had a bent cowling on his engine and the front edge of one wing was damaged. He flew down to Bowling Field and they took Charlie there too after he'd been at the Navy hospital. And then the 2 of them flew back to Norfolk. And I asked Charlie, well, what did they do? What were you punished? He said, we were confined to base overnight. And then we were both given leave and went home. And the Boxer sailed shortly thereafter, went down through the Panama Canal and over to Hawaii as they were getting ready for the invasion of Japan. They expected the invasion to be very expensive, as you can imagine, because of the fighting that had taken place at Iwo Jima and Okinawa in recent months.
Did they remain friends?
Couldn't hear you.
Did they remain friends?
As far as I know, yes. And they both consider themselves hot pilots. Charlie was an old, bold pilot. They say there aren't any, but he was. He and one of his girlfriends came to my house once after the book was published, and he knew that he was now famous, at least in Bethesda. And he sat in my living room and drank some of my beer and told me terrible lies. And he obviously was enjoying life. After he died, his girlfriend corresponded with his Christmas cards for a while. Interesting guy. He wasn't a old pilot. He was proud of what he'd done. It was, as far as he was concerned, it was just one of those fluky things. Somebody cut his tail off. Questions?